Welcome to Interrogating Arts Archives. So we were really we observe a development of bottom-up independent archives, like as was just mentioned, and this has been happening in like the last 10 to 15 years. Is yours longer than that?
Yeah, if you go back to the time when I first discovered the scene,
Yeah,
yeah, if you go back to the time when I first discovered punk rock in 1978, then that's a long time.
yeah. So it started as a personal archives,
Yes,
and then it
yes,
becomes
because
public.
those days was rare. You
Right.
cannot find it.
Right. Yeah, so the personal collection starts earlier, but it becomes public maybe in the last 10 years. And we also discovered that these are very alternative and small archives. And because there's a growing number of them in the arts, then we thought it's interesting to interrogate different mediums. And also there's an interest in how the archiving is done. They are using quite different methodologies. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Creating an archive is really a headache. Collecting in the beginning is not so bad, but when you have to actually curate it and put it in order, then that takes quite a bit of time. But now there is a kind of a change where we are looking at tracking what kind of meaning can we get about the arts from the archives, and what is the impact of the arts in different periods of history, different contexts, and how can archives be useful in the future. So let's start with Fashali.
My name is Fashali Fazli. I'm involved in this project, my arts memory project, since 2017, together with Katie as a main researcher. So now it's consists 7 of us, very colorful people, and showing that we are very happy doing this thing. Uh, so Katie, me, Anne-Lee, I think Anne is here, yes. Kopman, and Bilkis, and uh, Ifung, sorry. Yeah, and several other members, and also pembantu that help us put everything on the website. So basically, we started because Katie have a lot of materials, programs that she collected since her study, her research, and then she doesn't know where to put it, and then and also at that time I just came back from Canada and start collecting any theater shows that people put up on Facebook. So I extract all those data from the from poster, from Facebook event, and just put it for my personal reference. Probably maybe that's where I met Katie and we share same interests, and then we put everything together. And Katie, of course, this is Katie's initiative, and with the Ivy here as a producer. So yeah, now we expand our team a little bit more compared to the early years. Yeah, next slide. Yeah. So when we first discussed, and then Katie and I, we say, okay, we want to collect all this data from program books, interview, wherever we can extract those data, mainly program book pamphlets and poster, because that's where we can get the theater company, the director, the title of the play, dates and everything. And of course, more extensive information we can get from program book or pamphlets, and also from interview, paper clipping and whatnot. Because I think back in like old days, not many company have a luxury to print their pamphlet or poster, so we need to extract it from old newspaper. So yeah, and we try to cover from our material that available in our data is from 50s up until now, and we still are updating our data years by years, and maybe we shift our focus by years. For the early years, probably more on English theatre and Malay theatre, and then later on we moved to like to personal collection like indie theatre, small scale theatre, and then Chinese theatre, and then last year we focused more on a dance section. Previously, we have a section for music and also festival, but then we I think so much we want to cover, and then maybe Joe want to expand on the music, then Joe lah buat kan, let him do it. Because there's a lot of data, we cannot cover more. So yeah, we call it this artifact. Next. So how? Of course, we research. Let's say maybe like we have intention to maybe expand our maybe next phase of research on a Tamil play or a Sabah Sarawak plays. So we discuss together. So let's shift our focus towards that area, and then we collect our data, gather, digitalize, and then upload it, present it on our website. So yeah, so far we have 1,000 over entries on a theatre and dance collection, and our censorship database is led by Andy. We have 63 cases. So censorship is like not limited to performance, or also we collect for film, visual arts, sastra, literature, and many more. Oral history, we interviewed so far 4 series of interviews and articles. This is from the old Kaki Seni website that from Katis collection, and we re-upload it here. So yeah, so there's a lot. Next. Our website is live. You can visit it there. My art memory project. If you want to scan, then you can scan. But scan and then save lah dekat your browser. Don't. So yeah. That's it. I think for the intro. So the website is, for everybody who want to do research on theatre and dance, educator, student, or maybe artist yourself. You want to do something like, I want to do Uda dan Dara this year. So probably we have like 1,000, or maybe not 1,000, maybe berpuluh show Uda dan Dara, and then you can make your own, okay, this is the most original Uda dan Dara you want to do, and then you can go to our website and look at the past production lah, and do your own research. And we hope to encourage more artists, educators, students to use our website for their own research purposes. Yep, so that's the intro.
Thanks,
Yep.
Vishali. We'll move on to Joe.
Okay. All right. So, okay. So my archive is called the Ricecooker Archive. It started out as a blog back in '98, where I decided to have like a central repository for the next underground gates that coming out, the next releases or interviews with bands, the underground bands and all stuff like that. And this is the continuation of my work that goes back to the early 80s even. And also the first time when we started to have fanzines. I don't know whether you guys know what is fanzines? Okay, good. Someone good. So fanzines started to appear around here around 86, 87. And from then on, about late 87, the underground music scene started in that sense, where there are physical bands start playing their own music, away from the mainstream, purposely so, and totally non-commercial. And so my archives starts from that in terms of the regional collection, because also Singapore started around the same time, 87. Even though the Filipinos started by 79 onward, because my archive was supposed to be like just for the Malaysian side of things, but then after a while, when I was traveling, I was doing research, for a paper on the history of punk in Southeast Asia, and I met up with a lot of friends in Indonesia, Philippines, and I realized there's a lot of the stuff that they have, the artifacts, they were lost in fires, lost in floodings, and and also in Malaysia, the practitioners started to become a bit more religious and start burning off everything. So anyway, so I decided that I think I should open it up to feature regional underground, regional anti-mainstream, anti-authoritarian even certain parts, anti-establishment kind of like music, and also the whole subculture of it. These are the things that usually governments would not like you to keep. Most of the time, they are actively trying to erase most of these things in that way. The gigs being, the shows they have been stopped and raided, got detained and things like this. So there's a lot of problems that they have to go through just to exist, because it's beyond the money, beyond the industry of it all. And for me, it's not real because it comes from the heart. It's not about money. The connection is so real. So Ricecooker Archive is about that. It's collecting not just music. I even collect T-shirts that were made by themselves, fanzines, poems, whatever, pictures, photos, artwork, and so it's a lot. You start thinking about Southeast Asia, then you have to go up to Bangkok, go down to Cambodia. Cambodia, there's not many, but there are. Vietnam and all that, and then goes down to Indonesia, Philippines. And in Indonesia, there's so much. The thing about the artifacts is like they don't put out a lot of it. Like a cassette might be recorded in a studio somewhere and put out like 50 copies of it. And if you want to go back to like the mid-80s, those are really, really rare now. And even the fanzines are really, really rare now. But since I was quite obsessive about this thing since I was about 15, I collected those, And by the time when I announced the Ricecooker Archive, there are friends who decided to give their collection. So which is why I start calling it Ricecooker Archives, a lot of archives. So anyone who gave me a box full of their stuff, I will put it under their own archive, for this. So this is a sense of community, a sense of belonging. So yeah, so that's been going on. But the actual physical place where I wanted people to come and see and stuff, it's only going to happen, I would think, around the end of the year, because I'm moving to Sabah. So the Ricecooker Archive be in Sabah. So everything will be moved there. So can we show the video? Because just before I left the house, I decided to show what we have. Chaos by my band. So anyway, it's chaos. So you can see it's too much stuff. But I think all of them is very, very important. And it serves, I mean, it can just be some sort of nostalgic trip for some people who were in it. It can be also something that people from outside of it can see and realize there's a lot of things that you didn't know happened back then or even now, because the underground scene is still going well, even now, under the radar, everywhere in the region. And also it becomes like the archive can be used for whatever. If people want to come in to sample some of the songs, people want to use it for some films, whatever. We got photos, we got posters, we got t-shirts, we got whatever, and we got a lot of stuff. So I think that's it, you know. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
All right.
Thank you. We shall move over to Jackie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on the screen. So I realize I have a lot of slides, so I'm going to run through some of them. So I'm going to run through a bunch of it and then maybe stop somewhere because I think we'll discuss it later on. So my name is Jack. In 2008, Azrina Marwan and myself, we started Malaysia Design Archive. This was like a while ago, no? 2008. But at that time, we've collaborated on many, many things. And when we had an idea or a question or something that we wanted to put a lot of energy into, we will make a home for it. And the home for it is a website. And that's how it's started. So the question for Ez as a graphic designer is she really wanted to understand the role of design in history, especially the history of Malaysia and, in nation making. And for myself as a feminist activist, I really wanted to unpeel the politics and power behind the invisible. So things that we encounter every day, but we don't see the red thread of power lying behind it. And so, for example, like technology or like ghost stories or the design of everyday objects. So next slide, please. Sorry, I keep saying, I'm sorry. Yeah. So this is like, what is an archive? It's a big question. We had a lot. This came from one of the workshops. It has many, many threads. You will see why we came to this point. Malaysia Design Archive really started with going to kedai runcit. So going to lots of different kedai runcit, getting things like matchstick boxes, packages of different things, and then looking and treating them as sort of like seeing them as artifacts that embody traces of our collective histories, so really looking at them and putting them in the particular period of time and unpacking these different visual icons. And then from Kedai Runcit, we went to many, many trips to MCOP Mall, the flea market, and then secondhand shops, old cinemas, and we go back to hometown, there's old cinemas, then we go and shuffle through their storeroom to take all these old hand-painted cinema posters, eBay, and then finding people with very specific and in-depth collection of things, people like Joe, for example, and then even ending up in Arcade Negara and so on. And then we pulled all of this together and asked ourselves, what is the story of our country's history that's being told through these objects? Next slide, please. So one of the first things we did with the Malaysia Design Archive was to build this timeline through all of the stuff that we had. So we placed them in terms of where they were created or around like when, and then align together, put them into this like timeline of the country's history, like during the colonial period, pre-Merdeka, emergency, and so forth. So through this, just trying to understand what was being privileged, what's the story being told here through about social relations, about gender roles, about power, about national identity and labor, etc. And then we brought this timeline and this way of looking at history through everyday objects into other spaces, like, pop-up street art events, art exhibitions, and even at one point, Balai Seni Negara. But really the aim of this, next slide, please. The aim of this is really to invite everybody to have a conversation with history through this everyday design objects, be an active participant and a shaper and history teller and maker. Because we all have access to this and we all have opinions, and it's really just a way of kind of like looking and assessing. Next slide, please. This carried on for about 10 years, building the digital archive. And then in 2018, we set up a physical space in the Chongsan building. So this was kind of like a significant turning point for the archive, where we finally had a physical space. And we also expanded our team to include Simon Soon, who's an art historian. And from there, we moved from a design archive to a visual culture archive. So really looking at kind of like expanding this to think about sort of like visual culture and all of the different ephemera rather than just one specific form of visual material. Yeah. So next, I just wanted to show you some of the things in the collection. These are some of the things that we collect and who we collect from. So you can see that there's like, we collect stuff from artists, photographers, filmmakers, and actually, eventually, after writing this list, writers, activists, and even really everyday people. So this is kind of like who creates our visual culture is pretty much everyone's participating in this process. We also have thematic collections, and the thematic collection is built in pretty much a similar way as the Ricecooker Archive. It's usually by donation, someone's work or their own collection or someone's very specific research project, and then you go like, okay, now can you hold this and be a sort of like a custodian to it. And when we had a physical center, this became more common. Sometimes people will just leave things outside our office, our archive center, and then we'll be like, oh, okay, I guess somebody donated this, and then we just take it, and then sort of put them into a box, and it becomes like a collection. Next slide, please. So here are some of the things that we have. So for example, original blueprints. So when architecture students now come to MDA, they'll look at these hand-drawn architectural blueprints and they get excited, like, oh my God, this is all done by hand. It's kind of like, it's quite cool. Like you see your own kind of like material history in your own field. We also have like original mock-ups of design. So this is also hand-drawn. I think we are the first archive that has like this collection of, all these gurus of graphic design in the early 90s and so forth. Next slide, please. And this is one of our most popular books. It's like some 300 wrappers. It's donated by Goh Yu Huat. And he actually owned an ice cream factory during the colonial period. I think he himself was a bit of a collector and a design nerd. So he has all of these like ice cream wrappers, and everybody who comes gets very excited by this, like, because I think it really evokes something in us, like it's not a true emotional material connection. In some examples, ice cream wrappers, and then if you date them, you can really see what the conversation was happening during specific periods of time. Like some of it is about space travel, some of it is about like super interesting things. Next slide, please. We also have artist impressions of buildings by architects and screen, political screen, bogus merchandise. So this one is about trans women's rights. We also have collection of protest placards and contact prints of photojournalists and artists, like for example, Bernice Johnny, Zana Anwar, also privileged kind of like women photojournalists in this regard as well. So as you can see, our collection really ranges from like structure and buildings to the everyday object and the mundane. Next slide, please. This one is, I don't know, some of you might remember Ops Lalang is really one of those notorious events in 1987 where more than 100 activists, opposition politicians and academics were detained under ISA, which is detention without trial. So we have a collection of postcards that was donated to us by Carrie Sloak, which is created by the children of two detainees, Kapal Singh and Kwa Kia Song, to raise funds for the legal fees. So I think in this particular period of this significant historical period, I think what our collection is also saying is that it's a part of the history that is seldom seen, right? Like these kind of like depictions of young people. And it also shows that people of all ages are really a part of creating, engaging with this history and providing a narrative to what this means. Next slide, and then I'll stop soon, I think, in 2 slides. We also have brochures of Sexuality Merdeka, which is an annual festival that took place for a period from 2008 to 2011, and then it was banned because Malaysia. But it really is about, for us, it's really important to also, the archive makes space for that which is silenced, that the things which are muted, that is rendered, that is actually a space for record keeping, for things that are either actively silenced or erased or even absent-mindedly forgotten. So that's kind of the role that we see ourselves as playing. And record keeping is really privileging this as being persistently important. Next slide. And I wanted to spend some time to talk about this project. And that includes things like memes, because it's a very real texture of everyday conversation with politics and events through visual culture that every Malaysian participate in, and also ang pao. So we also collect these sorts of things as part of our collection. And for the next 2 slides, and then I think I will stop there, is Project 555. So about kind of like privileging it's about this kind of like, the archive as a space. Because when you put something in an archive, it means we're saying this is important, this perspective is important, and this participation of these people is important in this particular moment. So during COVID, when there's so much headlines and everybody's kind of like, really framing what the conversation and what this particular global pandemic was about, we wanted to create a space that is about the observation of everyday Malaysians, about their experiences, about their feelings, and what is going on in their daily lives during this particular lockdown period. So we called out for people to we collaborated with Anatomy, who created these reproductions of 555 small book, remember? And then we asked people, okay, we just want to make collections of a visual diary. If you want to be part of this, we will send you one of these 555 notebooks, and you just do a visual diary for a month, and then you send it back to us. And it was really powerful and wonderful, and really one of the most moving things that really has come back to us in terms of this, our role as an archive to sort of surface up this particular viewpoints and experiences. We also collaborated with Ilham at the end of it to kind of show, take this further out into different spaces. And I'll stop here for now. And there's the next slide that also shows the 555. You can find all of these, our online collection, search.malaysiadesignarchive.org, or pop into our center to look through our boxes. But that's it in a nutshell. Yeah.
Thanks, Jackie. Gone through the whole archives. Thanks. It's an interesting range. Presented very visually as compared to the music. The music madness. And we'll come to Catriona now. Go ahead, Catriona. This is the archival section of the Borneo Bengkel. Yes.
Hi, everybody. So I am an artist, curator, and researcher. I'm originally from the UK, been based in Sarawak in Kuching since 2009. So for me, archive is kind of a process of my work rather than an outcome. And I've used archives in a few different projects. So Katama, which is a social enterprise that I co-founded, Borneo Bengkel, which is an art platform with collaborators from across the island, Sarawak, Sabah, Kalimantan, and Brunei, and then Borneo Boat Loop Revival, which is an organisation looking to highlight the indigenous instruments that are found at Borneo. And then, so my archives that I've created, the archives that we've created together, I want to acknowledge that the information, the knowledge that we store on these archives is from ancestors, elders, and cultural practitioners from Borneo. So the knowledge is theirs. Any of the mistakes and the errors are all mine. So for me, I began my archival process about 10 or 12 years ago with Katama. We were working with rural communities, particularly Rumah Perudu, which is an Iban community in the Batong district. And this group of women are incredible weavers. They've got a great knowledge of rattan, of bamboo, of weaving. And so I was working with this community to document a lot of their craft practices and the material practices. And so we started talking about the motifs that they had. And from the motifs, we started building up a visual diary, a visual archive of all of the different motifs that they had, the names of them, any folklore that was attached to them. At this process in my archival work, though, I wasn't really bringing a very interrogative way of working. And I think this was 12 years ago, so a lot of the conversations that we're having now about Indigenous knowledge wasn't necessarily as prevalent. So I practiced dual naming, ensuring I recorded the names, but generally the community would give me actually the Malay name rather than the Iban name. And because I was very fresh to Malaysia at the time, I didn't realize the significance of these nuances. So it was an early step into archives, but I would approach it very differently if I was to go back to it today. So the next archival process that I began was really in 2020. So Borneo Bengkel is an arts platform. We do residency programs across the island. In 2020, we were planning to go to Kalimantan and do a residency. We know what happened in 2020, so we decided how could we be doing more collaborative work. And so we got some funding from British Council, the Connections Through Culture programme, which specifically builds links between Malaysia and the UK. And, you know, realising it was lockdown and how could people actually collaborate and work together, we realised that music was something that could really bring people together. Being from the northeast of England myself, I realised that folk music was a way that a lot of creatives talk about their origin and their stories and their experiences of being kind of marginalised from the capital city. And I felt there was a synchronicity and a similarity between Bornean creatives as well. So we created a project called the Sound Bank. We brought together 16 musicians from Sarawak, Sabah, Kalimantan, and also from the northeast of England and Scotland and Northern Ireland. To use music and archiving as a way to build bridges. So we got musicians from traditional musicians who play instruments like the sape or the bodram drums. We had people who were singing in indigenous languages. So Adrian Jo Milang, who sings in Kayan, but also Caitlin Ross, who sings in Gaelic, which is the original language of Scotland, which is almost extinct, but going through a revival. So there was these really nice moments of synchronicity. We got everyone on a Skype, on a Zoom call. People were collaborating and talking and sharing about their creative practice. And the outcome of it was the Sound Bank. So the Sound Bank is basically an archive of moments that the creatives decided that they wanted to share together. So we have found sounds, so sounds from the metro station, sounds from the jungle. We also have sounds of traditional instruments, of singing. And then as the archive evolved, some of the creatives started taking some of the sounds that the other musicians had uploaded and started playing around with it. So this living archive is up on our website. You can have a look yourself. This is the Sound Bank. And so we've just got incredible collection. A bit technical for me, so we can come back to this later, or you can take a quick photo of the website and have a look yourself. But Living Archive was created by one of the musicians that was involved in the program. So we were really fortunate to have the whole structure and setup of an archive. It's got search resources, and we were able basically to upload all of our files individually. And then so in 2022, we went from the Sound Bank, which lives online as a digital repository, and we actually presented it at Georgetown Literary Festival to audiences as an audiovisual exhibition. So we went on to working separately during COVID to create the Sound Bank, to then when the world opened up again, creating an exhibition from the archive. So it's archives as process, really, again. And then the final piece of archiving that I am working on is with Borneo Boat Lute Revival. So this is a collective of musicians and cultural practitioners who play the boat lute. So the boat lute, the most famous member of the family is the sape, who many of you may know is a Sarawakian instrument. It's actually found throughout Borneo. But alongside the sape, there is also the sundatang in Sabah. In Kalimantan, you have the kecapi. There's a whole family of instruments, but unlike the sape, a lot of these are endangered. There's a lot of cultural practitioners throughout Borneo who are trying to revive or keep these instruments going. But unfortunately, because so many of the instruments have been lost to the community, one of the things that cultural practitioners have to do is they have to go through museum collections or look at old books that were published by white colonial officers in the 1900s. And because of that, because these are books and texts in museum archives that are put together by outsiders, there's some really problematic language. So if you're trying to revive an instrument, you're having to read books that call your indigenous knowledge primitive, crude, very problematic. So basically, we were started looking at all of these archives, started collecting, and I got into a hobby during COVID of going through museum collections and then sending an email to museums and saying, this is an instrument, you've got it mislabeled, you haven't got the correct indigenous group mentioned, you haven't got the name of the instrument correct. And the museums responded really positively. So last year, we actually went to Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford University, and we took a lot of their Bornean artifacts. I was one of the representatives. Gindin McFeddy Simon from Sabah was also present with us, as was Zarit Rizita. So we worked with the museums to go through their collection, to look at the archives and the databases they've got. And the most important thing that we're doing is recentering Indigenous voices. So working with our wider collective, we're trying to find out origin stories, folklores, songs, and stories about these instruments and putting them back into the museum archives so that the future cultural practitioners don't have to work with such problematic source material. We also worked with the British Museum, and this was one of the kind of profound moments of the archive. We'd found a reference of this instrument in a book by Whiteread written in 1893. When we were at British Museum, we found this instrument, which we realised was the instrument that was featured in the book. And you can see in the top left-hand corner, Gindun is holding his instrument, and we realised in that moment that he was likely the first Indigenous practitioner, the first Dusun to hold that instrument for 100 years. And so before we put it back in the archive, he spoke to it in Dusun, he said some words, and hopefully it's not another 100 years before another cultural practitioner sees that instrument again. So yeah, centering Indigenous voices, ensuring that archives are representative of communities is something that's really important. If you'd like to check out some of our archives here are some of our websites. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Fiona. We are sort of running short of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine the Q&A section with the panel section together, right? So we have about 45 minutes together. Okay, so this is first time I'm hearing half the stuff. So I think my first question that I had prepared has actually been kind of answered. Like whose experiences or whose narratives or whose stories are your archives validating? And it seems like particularly yours and Katriana's and also Jackie's was really talking about the endangered and the marginalized and the silenced and the everyday, you know, the vernacular. And I guess, you know, our big question was why these alternative archives? Why these small alternative archives? And actually they are validating these voices, which will never ever get into the formal national archives, yes. Right? Yeah. Also, we realized that they're all gila collectors lah. It starts with a collector's itch, right?
Obsession.
Yeah, it's almost an obsession. But it's...
Can I say something?
Yeah,
because at that time, it's not like nowadays where I do believe that a lot of the arts and especially music, it's no longer, doesn't hold that sort of wonder and preciousness about it anymore. You know, like people, it's very disposable nowadays. Back then, well, at least for me, it's very rare and it's so precious. And this is why, this is the thing that I still feel about it, that it's so precious, especially when it comes from the underground scene, which is like, it's like a cassette might just be put out like 50 copies. Like a fanzine or a newsletter, we put out like 10 copies. and these voices that was written down or spoken or recorded in whatever musical ways that they have is very, very, how to say, it's a flash, that's it, and then they're going to go off, so yeah, which is what for me is very, very important.
So I'm kind of curious about the movement from very personal, passionate collectors, and how when it moves into a more structured archives, it's actually sort of like a snowball, gathering momentum and becoming more public. But Catriana's archives particularly is quite interesting because it's almost moving, we are starting from a very small geographical locality of us and our gang, right? And then we are moving to orang yang ada passion yang sama lah,
Yeah.
right? And then we are going to national, regional, and Catriona is actually started even some kind of like cross, global kind of thing. But what is very interesting about hers is it's crossing into formal archives. That means the alternative small archives is actually informing the previous formal archives. And I find that movement quite interesting. So I actually want to ask you all, this kind of use of the archives, is it something that you can control? Like who are the users of your archives, how you activate the archives? Is it something that all of you have to create events, and does it kind of find its own trajectories? Or do you find it difficult to kind of activate your archives? Who are your users? How do you activate it?
Okay, for me, it's not hard at all, because a lot of even the guys or the girls who were in the scene, let's say in the early 90s or late 80s, who wanted to just look at their image, the photo or the music that they did years ago after they got married and lost everything. And so yeah, I mean that's to the point where like media makers, like from people who do films, who wanted to have a certain sound, a certain imagery or feel of the era, or even the songs that some certain bands of a certain era, then I got calls for that, and so you have a big range, and then you have people like I was offered by a big kind of collector to bring this to Netherlands one time, and that's among the point I realized that wow, this is the values suddenly go up to me. I said, wow, I didn't really, I thought it was just for me and things like this. Then I saw that it really is very important for everyone. And for me, I believe what I have is for everyone. It's not just for the scene or whatever.
Jack? Yes, go ahead, Jack.
One thing to share a little bit about how, since we had a physical space, this notion of independent archive has really changed from kind of a bunch of people collecting or the pulling together of collection to the archive being a space and a site that is a Venn diagram for all kinds of different curiosities and nerderies and passion projects to come together. So we find that since we had a space, what happens is people come to MDA to share their research projects, or they bring their students to come and look at stuff. So we have a lot of students, like design and art students, who come and look at our collections and think about kind of what influences and informs their designing. Collaboration has become a super key point in how we engage with the archive. And this is collaboration in all different directions, right? Because it's about kind of collective memory making and what this process is. And I think about, can you control how people use the archive is a really interesting question, because initially for us, we were a bit worried because as a visual culture archive, a lot of people like all these like nostalgia things, and then things nostalgia, no? Like you just let's just reproduce all this really cool, kitschy old design, and then we just turn it into a cushion cover, and then that's the end of it. And what we really wanted to do is to get people to think about engage critically about your place in society, time and space through visual culture rather than makan nostalgia. So we had to think quite carefully about this. Oh, how do we do this? And then also we don't own copyright to these artifacts, right? We are kind of what's our role here as stewards and trust keeper? What is it happening here? And then when other international archives I think British Library came and was interested to do different things, then we also had to be a bit suddenly the role also shifted and go okay, so now we also have to think about what our role is in terms of this relationship building. And it's also about decolonizing. The whole project of independent archives is about decolonizing knowledge and who gets to participate in knowledge, memory, and history making. Then this role especially becomes quite important. So what is this function and form of collaboration? What are some of the process and protocols you want to put into place? What can we actually control, and what do we actually just let go and let loose? These are all interesting questions that we are still in the process of uncovering lah.
Catriona, can you tell us how you actually started working, say, with museums, and how was that link made between the alternative archives and the formal archives?
It was one of my strange COVID hobbies. I would stay up because I was in the UK during the time and working in Malaysian hours. So I had very strange hours, and I would go into these wormholes of, I couldn't do my field trips anymore. I couldn't work with the elders in the community anymore. So what I could do is start searching the internet. And at that time, a lot of journals, a lot of academic resources, a lot of museums absolutely opened up their archives and their resources. So we had access in a way as an independent researcher I didn't have previously. I sent one email to the Met in New York. They responded positively. I realized it was a thing that you could do, as a non associated researcher. You could contact museums, you can correct them, and then it kind of snowballed from there. So it wasn't a really thought through process. It was just one of those things that evolved during COVID, but very, very meaningful work now.
COVID seems to have brought out some pretty meaningful work. But I actually am interested in the experimentation that went on during COVID, because some of you mentioned that you actually started projects during COVID and your projects become part of your archives, which is really weird. So can you talk about, because people think projects, are happening now, right? I mean, they don't become archives immediately. So you talked about that, having ongoing projects being archived. Catriona, definitely, and Jack, you particularly the 3/5s example of how you are simultaneously doing a project and archiving it at the same time. I think this is a bit mind-boggling for people who have a traditional, how do you say, view of archives, right?
But you can see that the value of it immediately. Even just started. That this is gonna be awesome, and just keep it. So
You just keep what is awesome.
When I was I was running a record store first. It's called Ricecooker Shop, and it's actually for the independent releases, DIY punk releases or metal, whatever it is, from around the region. So Bangkok based bands, whatever. So what happened was when people brought in the cassettes or the CDRs or even the proper CD, they do, I would be the one who bought it, because I look at it as a something that's very interesting for my archive. So if the bands would bring, say, 2 copies, the first one will be with me. So I was spending too much money instead of running the business. So yeah.
Jack, you want to talk about how a project gets archived, and also Catriona, how an ongoing project, becomes an archive simultaneously?
I think you have the sense of an archive as archiving something that's happened in the past. So this sense of history as something that has passed. But actually, in our experience as an independent, visual culture archive, is really history is always in the making. The problem with history always in the making is that most of the making of this history is out of the normal narrative of history. So then it becomes then our role to go, okay, so what history is being made right now that is actually not part of the big history with capital H, but is part of like, the collective histories that we are constantly co-creating, that we also want to create a space and attention for. So in that sense, it's not contrasting when you don't see time as that kind of a linear thing and you're just doing this, but you're actually actively shaping. So one of the things I also wanted to share in the not shown slides is part of one of the things we also do is to do a bunch of workshops, and some of these is around speculative archives. So, really playing with history and speculating with speculative archives of both the future, because imagination is important, right? Like, what is important to you and what do you feel needs to be part of an archive that isn't there right now? So when we did this workshop, some of the ideas came out was an archive on passports. Like, what does it mean to have this, this documentation of that is so much connected to identities, and how would you build an archive around this? Or an archive of smells, something that is ephemeral that you cannot touch, or an archive of ghost stories, or ghost spaces. Like, these are kind of like speculative moments, but it's really also about silences. And I think a part of archiving is also recognizing that an artifact is just that, it's just one thing, but it's surrounded by so much silence. And this silence piece is the one that is also alive and constant. And it's something that we are also inviting kind of like active engagement around. I might have gone sideways from your question there, but yeah.
And Katriana, you are also kind of like doing research and archiving simultaneously, right?
So for this one, I think the sound bank is a really good example of that. So we wanted to create this collaboration. Suddenly we could expand because of the digital world, and because of the physical limitations, we could use this digital platform to collaborate. And we chose music because it feels that there's an interaction that happens and a response that happens in music in a way that visual arts doesn't necessarily as fluidly enable that. So the archiving became part of the process, part of the conversation, that every one of those 16 musicians could upload whatever they like. There weren't parameters. So some of them uploaded visuals, some of them uploaded audio, but it was these moments, these found sounds, these experiences. So the archive became a process rather than the outcome. Obviously, the outcome is there for everyone to see, but it was a way to create dialogue. So it made sense to be doing it at the same time as the project evolved. And then seeing every day as more and more people put stuff up was a wonderful process to see the archive in motion.
I was going to ask you, because you're very interested in digitalization and how digitalization plays a very important role in not just the past, but these archives in motion, because now I can just upload, right? Yeah. I'm doing something now, I can just upload into your archives at some point. I won't even need the collector.
Yeah. So compared to the other archive project, I think ours is more like everything you can find it in the digital world. You can access it online, and we have of course the material. If you want to go through bilik and see the material, the original version, then we have it. But our main platform is on the digital. I think because that's, I think, how you see we are not, because theater and dance is very special. I think it's compared to the other arts, it's ephemeral, right? So once done, it's done. And then some people say like, okay, record, and but the recording is actually you writing history of that performance. It's not performance itself. So I think what we collected, the material that we have, the poster, interview, and everything, is just an extended version of the ephemeral thing, the performance, the dance, and the theater. So the digitalization makes it like another extension of of these things so that it's continue exist in a different format. So it does not just exist as on a stage. So the recording, the poster, interview and whatnot is actually we creating more artifacts, more material artifact of that performances, and digital is more like, I think it's because it's cheap lah kot. And you don't need to rent a space, big space, buy boxes like Joe's have. Yeah.
Shells.
So yeah, of course, but we only need like the device to scan and yeah, but we believe that all those things even the theater is not, if you want to access it, you will not get the original version of it. You will still have the copied version of it. So the digital platform is, I think, is a different form of the original version. So yeah, so we really empower, we really use the digital platform so that people can access it.
Can I butt in? Okay, in terms of what I'm doing, in terms of what I'm archiving, it has become like a bit kind of like rare in the sense that people are looking for it, meaning that there's money on. So physical things, let's say the first demo tape by Butterfingers, let's say, people are selling it like $500 or more. I mean, and so what I'm dealing with, my archive not necessarily need to have the actual physical release. What I need is just access to it for me to digitize it, take pictures of it, take all of that data from it and give it back to anyone who has it. So this is how I deal with the releases or even the fanzines that come out first.
Are you going to be charging for these releases?
No, I'm not releasing it.
Oh,
I just, let's say you have
yeah.
a tape that I really want, but you say, Joe, it will be expensive if I want to buy it. So I will say, can I borrow it from you? Or can I bring my recorder here to your house and the scanner and everything, and I do everything in your house so that the thing never leaves your space, and I get everything up back with all the data. So that's what I'm doing. So a lot of the times, this is the way I have to do it, and I don't really need. Actually, at the end of the day, I don't really need the physical matter that as long as I have all the data, then you can do things. And also in terms of digitization, it's so good now because technologies now in terms of restoring digital audio is amazing. It's like Photoshop nowadays. So that's another level of things that we have been doing, like putting together a compilation of rare tracks that was recorded by whoever in the 80s, or put it together as a compilation and release it with express permission of the bands, of course, and things like this, and a lot more than that. You can use it to go further, and like me, I already started a publishing house in terms of music, so that I can publish this music that I found by looking for the people who created it, and then have it available for people who want to use it into whatever way they want it, to a certain fee, and give it back to the guys. Yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of
Jack want to say something?
Yes, Jack.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's kind of similar for us as well. Like sometimes we don't hold the actual physical artifacts. It's very it helps us to really play our role in archiving by just being able to digitize and then like your old first day covers and so forth. And also Malaysia Design Archive really would not have existed if it wasn't at a time where it was very possible to build digital archives. And I think many archives right now that starts off as passion projects also, begin online. Like we just had a conversation with the Syrian Design Archive, which was by a bunch of designers and architects, and they were really trying to capture, all these different design elements and road shop build, signboards and stuff because buildings are being actively destroyed. So how they did it is they started to take pictures and interview people and began their archive on Instagram. And I think that's kind of part of archival practice right now. But the challenge, I think, is also how to archive. What we found that's challenging actually is digitizing the digital. So archiving digital artifacts is challenging because some digital artifacts is only operable on some kinds of formats. So if you don't have that CD-ROM player anymore, you cannot read this thing, or if you don't have that, and technology gets changed so fast. So that's like a big point. And then whilst I have the space, I just wanted to say that my battery is super low, so I might suddenly disappear, and then I'll call back in on my phone. But I think we have to start driving, or my friends might kill me, so I might disappear off. But yeah, I'm really sorry for this, but I'm so glad to be able to still be part of this conversation. And
Thanks, Jack.
Thanks, Jack.
Hope you can get back to us on phone. All right. So it looks as though the current style of archiving might become archive.
So I just wanted to add into that as one of the roles of archives is so the instruments from the British Museum and the Pitt Rivers. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation now about repatriation of objects from international museums. And when we've spoken to our cultural practitioners, they're very happy for the instruments to actually remain in these institutions. So part of the archiving that we're doing is actually fully documenting all of the instruments, taking their sizes, so we can then reproduce them and recreate them in Borneo, and then the communities have those instruments, but new versions of them. So it's another way that we can activate archives is by reproducing them.
Interesting. Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that. Okay, I think we just have the last few minutes. I'm going to ask Mark to come up and just do some closing remarks.
As usual, I have like very jumpy kind of thoughts, but maybe a thing to help us hate these jumps that I might make is the idea of the reparative. Listening to the last hour and 45 minutes, another word maybe to think about archiving is to repair. So I was thinking about what are these people repairing? Why are they repairing these things? And for who is it being repaired for? Even speculative archives of C4 explosions, right? If that's documented, like what is it for? I guess one is this thing that has already been mentioned about the official and institutional versus the self-initiated or the indie. I think Sarah's last question, it's interesting because actually the National Archives, Archive Negara, under the Anwar Ibrahim government has shifted from the Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture to the Ministry of National Unity, which is a new ministry. Yeah, so whatever the hell that means. It's interesting that archives are parked under national unity as of 18 months ago. Okay, so that's just something we can think more about. For those of us who want to build national unity or want to complicate national unity, we are free to do that. I guess another jump is just, listening to everyone, collectors, hoarders, nerds, artists, activists, archivists, all these people. I guess I'm one of them. The subjectivities are really important, right? Driving these independent archives, as opposed to the kind of like faceless state national archives that we experience a lot in Malaysia. I mean, that's why they can just dump everything, So a lot of these start from personal collections. They start from a kind of haphazard, not always linear desire to document, to theorize the field that you are in, actually, right? To make it available as a resource for future researchers, generations, geeks, nerds, hoarders, and so on and so forth. And I think, especially in this moment in the world where everything is accelerating, and even amnesia is accelerating. It's a kind of act of resisting against forgetting. We are getting more amnesiac faster. It used to be 2 generations. Now it's like we're forgetting things like 10 years, 5 years. We're having to be reminded of oh yeah, there were things. Another jump, I guess. Another jump is related care. These are practices of care. Several, I think Joe and Jack kind of talked about archives, an archive of other people's archives, caring for other people's shit, gold, whatever, right? Caring for these objects and turning them into subjects. Because if they're just objects, they're not particularly useful. But if they are subjects, they can be stretched, they can be debated, they are alive and they are no longer inert. Caring for relevance, and that's also another tension, I guess, because a lot of this material carries a lot of personal, sentimental value, particularly if it comes from your own personal collections. I think in Janet and Joe's case, Janet also runs an archive called the Arts Education Archive Malaysia. Really kind of came out from their own personal material, their own personal work. So how do we kind of like resist building monuments to ourselves, but also opening up these spaces to others and making them relevant beyond just like sentimental, nostalgic kind of exercises, which is fine. They're important, but therein lies the jump from the personal to the public, right? If it's going to go to the public, it needs to be not so sentimental. I was thinking they do it in other places, but Malaysian archives, indie archives are still kind of in that zone of trying to establish themselves. But I would love for residencies. We talked a lot about collaborations, but I'm curious about how residencies can be created in these archives, and people potentially supporting residencies within these archives so that, other people can be invited into them and to kind of look at potentialities, gaps, future questions that are to come down the pipeline, which are not yet there. And I'm reminded a little bit of the work of an anthropologist and an archivist who I love. He's a Japanese anthropologist, folklorist by the name of Tsunechi Miyamoto. He only has one book in English. It's called The Forgotten Japanese. Yeah. But he, from the 50s to the 70s, Miyamoto kind of walked around Japan, the equivalent of 160,000 kilometers. He only ever walked around Japan his whole life. 160,000 kilometers is the equivalent of 2 times around the equator. That's how much he walked within those islands, yeah. And for those 20 or 30 years, he walked and he talked and he interviewed. His initial method was find the oldest person in the village or the mountain hill kind of locations or the rivers or the seaside fishing communities. So his initial method was to just go and interview the oldest people there. It's like, who are the Oba-chan and the Oji-chan? Get them all together and let's have a conversation. And he would interview them and he would collect all these stories and he would publish them and give them back to the communities, right? And he did this all across Japan. Collective memory, I think Jeff's question, dealing with this. So these became kind of like these practices of walking, talking, gathering people, assembling people to talk, to reflect, to put down memories together, then became like spaces which these communities started their own community archives across different prefectures, many prefectures. Then they slowly built like a network of archives across Japan from all these different towns, actually villages in all these prefectures. This is of course pre-internet and all this kind of stuff, but I like very much this idea of walking, talking, connecting, collecting, that I think we heard a lot about today. And it's really valuable work. So, please carry on. Please don't kill yourselves with the labor of it. And I'll pass it back to Janet.
Just want to say thank you to Five Arts Center and YSD for supporting this event. And also, this event is part of a larger celebration of GMBB. It's our 2nd year here, right?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a fifth anniversary. I know it's the launch of GMBB as a art mall
Yeah. So the building has been around for 5 years. Some of you might know this, but it opened 6 months before COVID. So 5 years afterwards, because launches are very important in Malaysian culture. It's launched this weekend, and I guess we are one of those many events.
Yeah. And thank you all very much for coming. I hope it was a good session for you.